mythology and tears, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we are continuing on with our series on enlightenment, and related to that, this idea of the multiple levels or aspects, or they say bodies of enlightenment or bodies of a Buddha. And we've been doing this little series. We like to work in little series, right? To do a little deeper dive on things. And we knew the whole time we had a great closer. We knew we were going to end strong. Our closer is the Dalai Lama. So we wanted to end and say what the Dalai Lama has about this. It's kind of like having who was it? Mariano Rivera? Was that the closer for the Yankees back in the day?
Mariano Rivera, yeah.
Mariano Rivera. You have the strong closer at the end, right? Dalai Lama throwing the cut fastball, doing this thing. Mm-hmm.
He's got a nasty,
it's funny
nasty sinker.
Dalai Lama has a nasty sinker, a vicious cutter.
He throws a knuckleball.
It's so funny because he'll throw you some curves too. Ha! I was talking with my daughter. It was her birthday during this week, and she's saying every guy knows something about sports. And I was like, yeah, they all do. Every single guy will know something about sports, no matter who that dude is. He knows something about it, right? And she was like, I know nothing. And I was like, yeah, it's a little bit of a handicap, you might want to work on it a little bit, at least know something. But anyways, okay, so a little bit personal on like the Dalai Lama for me. I just wanted to talk about him a little bit. What I found about him in the beginning is, when I first was, when you first become aware of him, you always get this like public persona where he's talking about love and compassion, and he seems like a nice guy, and but I wasn't like overwhelmed or anything. I was just like, okay, there's some guy, the Dalai Lama. I was already interested in Zen and stuff. I was doing things, and I didn't have any sense of like probably the parts that we're going to talk about, the deeper part of what he teaches. I just thought, well, he seems like a smiling person, kind of relatively cute old guy walking around, and I didn't get the depth of it. And I remember talking to another faculty member on one of the campuses where I teach, and he had the same experience. He was like, oh my God, I started reading the Dalai Lama. Holy shit, this stuff is so deep. I had no idea. I thought he was just like sort of a nice, friendly guy who talks about compassion or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to like bring that up. We like to do things personal and how we got like kind of exposed to things. So my first exposures to the Dalai Lama were like, I think my dad bought me a book about like the Dalai Lama and how to be, more compassionate at work or something.
Sure.
And I was like, I never read it. And I was just like, okay. But it was nice for my dad to do it. I appreciate that he went and did that thing. But what happened was I was on a road trip. I think I was out in like around Colorado. I was going to climb up the Continental Divide. And I sometimes like to stop at bookstores and stuff. And I imagine I was in Boulder maybe, but I stopped at this bookstore and they had this Dalai Lama book called Yoga Tantra, Keys to Magical Feats or something like that. And I thought, well, that's a badass title for a book. Mm-hmm. I should read this. And I didn't know anything about the Dalai Lama's connection to Tantra. I didn't know what Buddhist Tantra even was, I don't think, really fully. And it's Pathway to Magical Feats. And I got the book and I was like, oh my God, this dude is so deep. So that was sort of my experience of like my eyes being opened up to kind of like who the Dalai Lama was. Mm-hmm. I don't know, what's your experience with that? How did you become aware of him?
I think like most people, he is kind of a pop culture figure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In a sense that he's known, but I would say probably more in the last like 10 years, just a little bit before I kind of started down the path, if you will, on the Buddhist trajectory. Somebody gave me a book by him called like the 365 Dalai Lama. And there's like one quote per day.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I think that was kind of like the first and it's not, yes, a lot of it is on compassion, but there's other things in there that are far more like insightful. Not to say that passion is not insightful, but it's a different kind of thing, things to think on, things to meditate on, mm-hmm. And it sort of opened the door in a sense that like, again, he's more than just a figure who's known for one particular thing. You start to see the mm-hmm. nuance mm-hmm. actually. And what he's known for is all the other things to people who follow him,
What do you think? Makes sense what I'm saying? Because I really had the feeling like he just seems like a happy kind of person. And, obviously Tibet has had tragedy and he seems to be handling it in a very, with a lot of equanimity or something like that. You could respect him just based on, but I don't know if the depth of it really didn't hit. So yeah, okay.
And once people learn you hear his story, you learn about his life and all the things that have happened. It changes the game, and to the credit of all these Tibetan lamas who left Tibet and came to the US or went to other parts of the world, all their stories are crazy heroic.
Oh yeah,
You
for
know?
sure.
Like it's wild. So just these people are
Gallic
amongst,
Rinpoche having to
yeah,
flee out through the mountains and stuff like that, and they have to live
they're
in India, and yeah.
they're incredibly heroic.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
I mean, to be
and
honest, my whole experience being around to like, especially the kind of like that generation of Tibetan people, they're
yeah.
like impressive.
And
They're
are,
impressive people.
that generation is not in existence anymore. That was a particular,
It's going to like be passing.
it's going to be passing. So it's a very particular, set of people who went through a very particular set of experiences, obviously their own unique individual experiences, but it was born out of that kind of trauma, and that the occupation obviously of Tibet, which then opened Buddhism up for the rest of the world. And it's shaped many, 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 many people's lives. So
well, that's kind of like the weird karma of it in some ways, even though this country was lost, it ended up creating this explosion. Which obviously the Dalai Lama is like one of the key figures or the key figure in this whole thing, right? The older generation is kind of amazing. And I'll talk about being at the Dalai Lama's monastery just kind of briefly at the end, just to encourage people maybe to go. But there were these couple of like older Tibetan ladies. And these are some pretty saucy meditations. And then you would do the mantras. And most of the time when you do mantras, they're kind of silent. People like start the mantra going, and then you just kind of do it silently for yourself, kind of in your own inner voice. But we were kind of doing them as a group, and they were singing these Tibetan kind of melody versions of this, kind of like playing off of it. And it was these like, it would be like, your great aunt or your grandma there in the saucy tantra retreat belting out these little tunes. It was really charming. Yeah, very endearing. So yeah. All right. So I also was impressed, once I got more into the Dalai Lama, kind of about the openness of his spiritual thought and style. He's very, like, I guess you'd say, ecumenical. He's very open to like different ways of thinking about things, certainly within the Tibetan Buddhist world. And this has created even some controversy because he'll accept things from other of the 4 major schools of Tibetan Buddhism that, people, maybe if they were more purist or something in the Gelugpa style, might not even really like that he does that. But he's very like kind of open and laudatory about all these different things. So he's kind of non-sectarian in that sense too. You know what I mean? And there is a part of this is going to be related to this idea called Mahamudra, which we'll probably do a separate thing on at some point.
Yeah.
It translates as like the Great Seal, but I got these teachings as kind of a transmission from Gallic Rinpoche, and it is part of the Dalai Lama school, and they're very open. They talk about how, this Dalai Lama school took from all the major Tibetan schools, and they recognize all of them as being really good. And so I like that spirit. I like that spirit of like openness and willing to learn from different places. Obviously, that's a big deal in like what we do here, right? Trying to go through and keep an open mind to what can be learned from different points of view and all that. And it has that quality to it. It's very inclusive in that way, and I really like it. I was like, I haven't prepped it. I prepped it when we did our old interview with Guy Newland, right? Buddhist scholar. And I was looking through the Dalai Lama's sort of commentary on this same thing that I got from Gallic Rinpoche, which is sort of like an overview of almost like all of Tibetan Buddhism, Tantric Buddhism. And it got to this point where he's like, even like making reference, it's a joke. And we talked about it with Guy Newland back in the day. He talks about like, well, maybe this is like what they mean by the Holy Spirit or something. And he's dropping little pieces of like Christianity there in kind of a playful way, but not in a disrespectful way in any way, and I thought, okay, this is cool. This person is very open. Okay, my last thing on this is just to talk about visiting the monastery in New York. I've been out there a few times, and it's a really great experience. And what I would say is it's kind of really open to all. So if you go on the Dalai Lama Monastery website, I think if you just look up Dalai Lama Monastery in New York online, it'll pop up. Or otherwise, it's Namgal. If you look that up, it'll definitely pop up. And going out there, they were very warm, very welcoming. And it wasn't like you had to have a lot of background, it seemed like, to go in. Sometimes there is this idea, if you don't have a lot of experience and it's a higher level retreat or something, people might be a little bit more reluctant to let you go, or, there can be that attitude. But they didn't seem to be like that at all. They were just like, you want to come? Come on in, welcome to everyone. And so you could go in there, regardless of like where you were at and sort of what you had learned so far. It was kind of cool, and they were all cool about it. I had already had like tantric empowerments and things like that. So, there were some things I really wanted to learn about, and they happened to be doing them, and I was like, I'm going, for sure. And those were like great experiences in my life, as far as, well, I mean, spirituality and just in general, they were great times. But I just wanted to say that it's really it's a very open place. So if you get interested in any of this kind of stuff from the point of view of the Dalai Lama, they are welcoming, and it's something you can go in there and you don't have to feel nervous about going in there. And will people be, I don't know, looking at you askance because you don't have as much experience or something? No one's going to do that. And the students were cool too. And there was a lot of the Tibetan people there who are, obviously part of that whole institution, who were really nice. So yeah, I could say I had really great experiences there. And I did ultimately, I'd mentioned it before, and I was one of the head monk there, and I had promised him if the Dalai Lama gave tantric empowerments, I would do them. And so I have to say, like, in terms of my personal appreciation of the Dalai Lama, I've done like 2 of those with the Dalai Lama, and they meant a lot to me. We don't talk about that too much, but I just want to say I consider him kind of be an important. I don't know him. We sort of know people who know him, funnily enough.
Yeah.
So we're not that many degrees of separation away. But he's meant a lot to me, in terms of clarifying things, and the books aren't always easy that he's writing when he's really going for it. They're complicated. Like, he doesn't pull punches on it. He'll go and say the real thing, and if you don't understand it, it's up to you to go farther. So if you get to the deep stuff, he's not necessarily sugarcoating or softballing things. But if you want to know, it's very deep, and he's meant just a ton to me. So a little like shout out of gratitude. And I would consider him to be, like, in the Tibetan Buddhist world, one of the probably 3 major teachers who meant a lot to me. I don't know. What do you think? You got anything you want to say about the Dalai Lama from your own point of view?
I mean, I think probably one of the best stories that I heard, and you probably heard this too. I forgot who it was who was giving an interview, but they spent some time with him, and they were just commenting on how nice he was to all the people who worked for and around him. So the drivers, the waiters, the wait staff at the hotels and the restaurants. And this person basically said, like, what he's doing is not an act.
Yeah.
This is who he is. And I could tell you, not because of what he says, but of how he acts all the time.
Even when the cameras aren't on him or something like that.
Right. Especially when the cameras are not. Like, there's no, this is how he is to everybody. And, hearing that, it really drives home this idea that, like, there's been some internal change, that he's not on, and there's no on and off switch. It's just more on, more and more and more.
The cameras are on, so I'm the act Dalai Lama. And then when the cameras are off, I'm just going to, like,
I'm some random
do whatever,
smoking a Newport, like whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
drinking
so
the Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Yeah, that's right. Throw me a Coors, whatever we got.
Dalai Lama. Yeah.
Just
drinking it up.
But that kind of story really highlights, I think, the nature to someone's character. And so then when you know that about somebody, then the other things that they're saying to me anyways, have a deeper weight because they're living it, and that carries for me, because I think for those of us who have a meditative practice or have are working on ourselves in some developmental or psycho-spiritual kind of a way, we want the change to be real. You want the change to be in your life. If you're doing yoga, you want to have more flexible legs or whatever. But it would be nice if when you bent down in the morning to tie your shoe, you didn't throw your back out. Like, that's how you know your yoga, what I'm saying? The physical part of your yoga is working, right?
When you go to achieve that bizarre Kama Sutra sexual position, your hips will go there.
Your hips will go there. You won't cramp.
Yeah, you don't have to, you're not cramping up in the middle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I think,
I'm just saying it's alive. Like, the practice, what he's talking about, it's alive in his life. And therefore, if it's alive in his life, well, then it could and should be alive in anybody else's lives, should they choose it to be that way.
Yeah, I think it's part of the tantric philosophy in this too, that you see everyone as an emanation of whatever you want to say, divine energy, enlightenment energy, right?
The supreme source.
The supreme source, per our last episodes.
Yeah.
But you see everything like that, and then you could tell that he's probably really living that, right? He probably really is seeing everyone as whoever he's, Vajrayogini or Amitabha or whoever it is for him. I don't know. Yeah. I heard kind of an amazing thing. Maybe it was Lama Glenn Mullen, one of our favorite tantric teachers, and it might be from him, that he was talking about there was a bunch of people, they were doing one of the retreats, teaching retreat, and Dalai Lama's lecturing, and everyone's kind of getting tired. It's the end of the day. They're taking questions from the audience. And then one of the people, everyone wants to go at this point. Your knees are tired, your back is tired, you want to go, you're hungry, you want to go, even though it's the Dalai Lama. So people are asking questions from the audience. And then I don't think they said what exactly the question was, but it was a question that came from the audience that would just make you groan potentially, because you're like, oh, I can't believe this person asked a question that could have seemed kind of stupid. And so asked the Dalai Lama this question, and of course he's been sitting there the whole day. But the impressive part of the story was that he sat there and answered the question in this very deep way, giving it full respect and import, and kind of took it to places that were implications of the questions that maybe even people in the audience who maybe knew more wouldn't have gotten. And he gave this whole incredible dissertation on this question and then dismissed everybody, but he respected the question, and we teach. I teach, and I when something comes up, I try to remember that thing,
right?
That he took people's questions seriously. He didn't just go, well, that was a dumb question, let me answer it with a word or two, treating it like it's a dumb question. He actually took the question seriously, and I think about that seriously. I'll be doing some Zoom, and there'll be some question, and maybe you're supposed to go on break, and someone asks something, you're like, okay, I'm gonna take this question seriously. Yeah. But anyways, so okay, talking about enlightenment and the enlightened state, and this idea of these different aspects or dimensions of enlightenment, which has been our conversation for weeks now. So I think the most important idea that got me when I was trying to throw my side of these notes together was the idea that this could be probably captured in this notion that enlightenment, this is per the Dalai Lama, enlightenment is gained or realized or achieved by meditating on it, rehearsing it, and practicing it. This is super interesting. And I think this was an earful and a mindful for me when I first heard it, because I thought, oh, that's interesting. So when you're meditating, what you're doing is you're practicing the enlightened state for yourself. That's what you're doing. And then in doing that, you're also working on the different aspects of yourself that are going to be transforming more and more towards that. It's a deep idea. And as someone who had meditated for a while and thought of all the different reasons why people meditate, I thought, well, this is a really deep way of saying what the intention is. You have to say, well, why do you meditate? Well, you're meditating on transforming yourself, achieving this thing. You're meditating on this. It's kind of a practice, and it has a lot of interesting statements in it to my mind. It's already interesting to me. That was but it was also the idea that it's stating something about the nature or the potential of a person, or really any living thing, that the potential is there to do this, which I probably already believed, but it was an interesting way to think about it. And we'll try to unpack this more in this little conversation as we go along. At least what struck me about it, because it's a deep idea. So a lot of times I'll talk about this idea of there's going to be this final result, and certainly in the way that this is going to be presented from the Dalai Lama, if you kind of go further with this, will be that this is the result of a path. So enlightenment is kind of the result, the meditative path and your psycho-spiritual path and all the things you're doing there is your path, and this is going to get the result. But then also there's the idea of what you might call the ground. So this is the kind of famous idea of ground, path, result, which I had never heard anyone really say like that outside of the Tibetan Buddhist world. But I thought that was pretty impressive too, just to say it so clearly. You have a ground, which is sort of who you are as a living thing with your potential. And all living creatures have these potentialities. And then there's the path involved, which is the meditations and other experiences that you have, teachings that you get, trainings that you do, and so on. And then there's result, which everyone is sort of in a way evolving towards. This would be sort of like Bob Thurman's point, right? We're all evolving towards this in our own way. And that's the result. And so that's that whole idea of ground, path, result. And so these ideas were really, I don't know, very meaningful for me when I first learned them. Okay, what I'm doing when I'm meditating is I'm rehearsing the enlightened state. I had never thought about it exactly like that before. It's a statement about the potential for enlightenment in different ways in each person. Okay, that I had thought about. And then this idea of ground, path, and result, but said so clearly. I was like, I don't think I had heard that phrased that clear, that succinctly. I was like, okay, I can see that. That's put very pithily and to the point in the way that I can definitely get what's being said. So this is sort of some of my, I know, preliminary impressions in learning this. Do you remember how when you were first hearing about these kinds of things, what kind of stuff you related to?
Yeah, so you had given a lecture on this sort of Taoist Buddhist treatment that we have referenced loosely on this podcast before, maybe like once prior. So no worries if you've never heard about that before. It's not a big deal. But it's, you know, there's Dharma lectures involved and there's philosophy involved, but that was kind of the first time, and that was at this point now, I don't know, like 8
that would have
years
been
ago.
like going on 7-8 years ago.
2014 at this point.
15, 16, I think is my dates on the notes on those things.
So it's kind of it's an interesting use of language to put things in like a very clear sort of stepwise fashion. That
I kind of love that, even though there's a mysterious quality to things. I love in this thing, maybe for someone who has a little Virgo earthy part of me, like have things said kind of clear.
Yeah,
and my past lives are Virgo.
Well, but this is clear. It's clear, and it's clear in its ambiguity. Actually, very clear, in that like
it's as clear as you can make it.
Yeah, it's as clear as you can make it. Because, you know, explaining things that don't have boundaries, then you have to arbitrarily put boundaries around them. And so this is a way in which you can, you know, provide somebody with a very concise way of describing just the movement towards improvement. Right, that rhymes also.
Yeah. It's pithy. Maybe that's going to be our Shot of Spirit title that we're going to do at the end. Movement towards improvement.
Right, but
it also work as like an X-lax thing or something.
Right. There you go. Release the stress. Movement for improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it was because I had like maybe studied in like Zen things where it was like, well, we'll give you a bunch of cryptic riddles, and that's fun too, and you know, that's a good time. But I also then appreciated this, like, oh, this is really clear. You know, it's not like I'm going to talk about sound of one hand clapping, or like some old Chinese guy hitting some guy on the head with a fan. Yeah, well, he says something, and then you know, it's like a lot of those old Zen stories are awesome, but they're also like a little bit cryptic. And so this was refreshing for me after my experiences. But like, this is said pretty clear.
The other part is that like deep spiritual teachings relate directly to life, like straight on, head on. You could just lay them right on top of this. And ground path result is much of how we do everything. All right. So we'll use an example. I'll use like from fitness. Eric, you want to run a marathon. Well, the ground is the body, and what you have right now is a cardiovascular and physical strength base, right? That's what you'd write. The path then would be the people who help you, your coaches who help you along the way, your nutrition that you do, your breathing that you work on, the stretching, the running, the program that you get put on in order to achieve the result, which is, yes, the running of the marathon, but then the feeling of being satisfied when you're done, the experience of having it all as part of your life.
Well, you'll come out a different person. It's not just that you ran a marathon. You're not the same person anymore.
Right. You've gone through this transformational process. And that's a description. Ground path result is a very distinct or succinct way of describing a transformational process.
Yeah. Sometimes this whole tantric world is described as the path of transformation.
Yeah.
Right. You're trying to transform something. Right. So yeah, it's a deep idea, you know, and I think the clarity of it meant a lot to me. And yeah. Okay. Something else to say about that? Maybe it'll come back if we need it. Right. It'll always come back if we need it. So, so just real quick on this is just kind of interesting thing, because, you know, we've been talking about these different schools, and just to pull this together, there definitely is the idea that some schools will be described as sometimes more like suddenist, where you just bang, you're getting some big realization. And some schools are described as more gradualist, where there's sort of like a process. This can also be kind of looked at being like more naturalistic, like we had when we were talking about more the Dzogchen vibe and the previous stuff. You're just sort of naturally letting things go and recognizing the condition of what is, and you realize, oh, holy shit, that's enlightenment, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
Where in the Dalai Lama thing, it's much more gradual path and directed. So there's kind of these two major ways of thinking about this. And I just wanted to say something about it, because we've been talking about these different points of view. And if people get interested, you're going to go farther in it. You'll start to recognize that that's happening, you know? So there's these two ways. I think in the sudden one, you're sort of recognizing that enlightenment is sort of this hidden thing that you already sort of had, and you just, boom, recognize that it's there. Kind of a natural enlightenment state, natural three values of the Buddha, that's kind of just was there hanging around the whole time. The funny part about that, and I think the Dalai Lama does make this point, because this is, again, shout out episode of the Dalai Lama, and he's open to these ways of talking about things too. He doesn't completely dismiss them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Even though that isn't the vibe of the main place he's coming from for the school that he represents. But, even this has this deep element of training or something to recognize this thing. Because in that case, you're meditating to have an experience of recognition or epiphany or something, but you still have to do something,
right?
So there still is a process that's happening, because this sense of realization is in some way obstructed, and those obstructions have to be cleared away for you to kind of have this experience, right, of recognizing this thing. So I think the point that gets made here is that I think, especially if I paraphrasing maybe the Dalai Lama's attitude about this, would be like, yeah, either way, you're going to be doing some kind of training, right? Something to do this. And so maybe these things look a little bit more close than they might initially appear, and the Dalai Lama will talk a lot about Dzogchen, this thing that we were talking about with the supreme source. He does talk about those ideas. So he's open to them, which is already a big step, right? To be open to different ways of thinking. But he always, as he's framing it, he's saying, yeah, there's an element of you need instruction and you need to go through experience, even to have this realization, if that's the way you're going to frame this question. So maybe it's more similar than what it seems. But I wanted to bring the point up because we've been talking about this from different points of view. And there's no doubt that if you get interested in this subject, you keep going further, you're going to hit both of these kind of lines of thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and they have, and it's also, it's lines of thought, but it's all, I also feel like it's a part of the experience that you as an individual are going to have moments of deep insight, aha moments, if you will. But those happen because you're along this path.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Bob Thurman was funny in the interview with him because he gave me shit about a couple of things. First of all, my hair, then probably my hat. But there was one part where we were talking about I was bringing up this issue of this gradualism thing a little bit. And he was like, well, don't undermine the importance of epiphanous experiences. And I was like, okay, well, he just gave me shit again. I can't say anything because it's Bob Thurman. I can't give him any shit back at all. Just have to sit here and take it. Okay, fine. But he was making that point, that you can have these epiphanous moments no matter what you're doing, right? No matter which of these things you're on, you're probably going to have epiphanous moments along the way, which is how much more, I don't know, I get kind of hyped about these things. How much more fun is that? What's more fun than an epiphanous moment?
Right.
It's as good as your best orgasm in a way, right?
An orgasm for the brain.
Yeah, it's awesome, right? So how to meditate on this. So this is interesting. If this thing is that supposed to be in this Dalai Lama school, that you're supposed to meditate on the enlightenment state and experience, what's that about? And I think you have to say that the Tibetan Book of the Bardo, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, plays a big role in this in many ways, right? It sort of sets a framework for this. And we've done some episodes on that. So if people want to go back and peek those, it could be something that complements this. But in any case, the idea is that everyone has this deep part of their spirit or soul or mind or consciousness, whatever you want to call it. A lot of times, if you're reading the Dalai Lama, he'll talk about this clear light mind. And it's kind of a little bit of a more bland way of saying Buddha nature. But everyone has this deepest part of who they are. And there is this general idea that it's kind of obstructed. It's not able to fully shine out. And you get lots of metaphors around this, it's like a hunk of gold that's wrapped in some old rags or something. You pull the rags away and the gold will shine out. This whole idea, I'm thinking about when they open up the Lost Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but that just melts a bunch of Nazi faces. So I don't think that's the idea of this.
Probably not.
No.
Well, how do they talk about this in the Kabbalah, Eric? That it's a broken mirror.
They talk about sometimes the image of a lamp.
A lamp. There you go.
Punk the holes in the lamp, and the light will start to go everywhere, right? Yeah. But the lamp was there kind of the whole time, right? You have to poke through. Yeah, those kinds of metaphors. I'm also thinking about when you open up the suitcase in Pulp Fiction and they don't show you what's inside.
Right.
It just gleams out all golden. Yeah. Anyway, so something happens. The
or
suitcase, Samuel L. Jackson opens the suitcase and the Buddha nature shines out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say something. What?
No, or if somebody gives you some peanut brittle and you open it up and out pops, what are they? Cloth snakes with springs on the inside.
Is that in the peanut brittle? It's the surprise toy at the bottom of the box of
Cracker Jack,
Captain Crunch or something. Yeah, Cracker Jacks. Yeah. The little tattoo on the bottom of the Cracker Jack box.
The decoder ring that you can't decode anything with.
It just says buy more Cracker Jacks.
Right. You're like, oh snap, I ran out.
So this whole idea of this like a deep part of the person is obstructed. Yeah, we were talking about these Buddhist and Tantric, Buddhist and Taoist Chinese medical type treatments. And that's part of the goals of those things, to give people like sort of a snapshot experience of this deeper part of who they are, right? That's the hope of those kinds of things. The other part that comes up in like this conversation is that occasionally this will appear in more unobstructed ways during certain parts of human life more naturally. Part of it's in the death and reincarnation process, which is why this Tibetan book of the Bardo or the dead is such a big deal, because the notion that it's at some point during the whole process of death and reincarnation, everyone's Buddha nature shines through as unobstructed as it's going to be, right? It appears very clearly as other things are sort of fallen away. It's kind of like the ultimate unobstruction, and in that moment it appears. So it's definitely part of the Bardo idea. But it's also supposed to come up in things like sexuality and orgasm, that this will kind of appear in kind of this dramatic way during the orgasmic experience, which is why it's such a big deal with the tantric aspects of this. But what's interesting about that, we haven't done episodes on this. We keep promising we'll do episodes more on sex.
Right.
But the reason we didn't, I was thinking about this, is
we haven't.
Yeah, we haven't. Is because we wanted to, and we didn't expect it to be take such a long time. We didn't expect it to be such a tease.
Well, first we did episodes on love, so we're doing the courting process very old school,
It's like a Jane Austen novel.
Yeah.
Eventually you get to see the estate at Pemberley. We're going to do an episode on real estate and property accumulation. To woo. Now it's really like I think the reason why we didn't do it in the beginning was because we wanted to like have serious conversations and not have everything degenerate down into like here's a better way to perform cunnilingus or something like that. Not that those things aren't important in life. They're
important.
They are important, but in any case, so I think though, in this thing, I think this is part of the explanation why sex is so meaningful and then, fun. Though that's probably an understatement, even of what the idea is, that because in that moment, like the Shen of the person shines through. And that's kind of what people are probably really longing for as much as anything else. You know what I'm saying? That's what you're longing for in that moment. It's not just that, those moments of like, oh, that felt good.
Yeah.
What you're really longing for is something deeper. You're longing for the experience of your own spirit.
Yeah. You're longing
of another person or something.
Yeah. You're longing for an opportunity to be vulnerable. Right. And there's a power in that, proverbial and actual nudity or relative nudity, depending on how much time you have.
Yes.
Right.
It's a busy world.
Busy world. Yeah. Keep my shoes on. Never know. I gotta get out of here. But then there's also the sort of physical experience of like just being overwhelmed with sensation.
Those are all true. And I think like the more open you get, I mean, the way I'm thinking about this for this, like, this little thing, like the more open you get, the more your emotion will come through. Right. But that's a sign of like an opening that's allowing something to unobstruct, and the sensations of the body being so meaningful and strong. That's like opening something that wants to crack open. But then like, I think from this way of thinking about this sort of tantric way of thinking about this, when you get down to the deeper part of this, what's sort of happening is it's like this moment where everything else like flitters away.
Sure.
And then you have this experience of your own Shen. I mean, that's that part of it. You know what I mean? That this moment happens where you experience this amazing part of who you are. So there's other things, I don't know. I mean, just from this point of view, the idea would be like, that's kind of what the longing is for. That's part of the sexual longing, I guess, right? The experience of that, not just not other things that are also wonderful, but this is like what the deeper longing is.
Well, then what it does to the person who is experiencing afterwards, right? And then you get sort of like these great poets, you know, we talk about Rumi or, you know, Hafez or any of these, you know, poets, you know, like the poetry that to me that's the deepest is the stuff that's written about love, you know, the words that people are willing to conjure to express their longing, their desires, the way in which that the other person is affecting them in such a, you know, intimately personal and spiritual level that many people, almost probably every person has been in touch with at one point or another. They could totally get it. You know, it's like a totally relatable thing. And that's the sort of like the residue, you know, of like the longing to be back in that kind of a state.
Yeah, there's kind of like, I think that's the reason why we want to do these episodes on love before we want to do anything on sexuality. It's like been really delayed. But like we wanted to do that because it's like that part. Sometimes I think in the tantras they can talk more about the sexuality aspect without the love aspect. Sometimes they do that. But there's also the aspect of like the heart being opened and the whole energetic system being opened by the fact that there's a real deep bond with another person. That's the love aspect, right? This special thing, two people really connect and vibe, and then this opens this thing up, and then it's easier to kind of feel your own Shen. But I think they would say that even in love, you're kind of like, you want to feel at least in part your own spirit, right?
Sure.
Yeah. I think it's why in Rumi, like when Shams is gone, you know, he still is like saying, okay, it's still always there. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I got one thing.
Uh-oh.
What about what about when like people have, you know, love feelings towards like balloons or stuffed animals or cars, you know what I'm saying? But like not just like, oh, I love it, like sexual desire for these kinds of things.
I don't know. Do you have a theory about it? I don't know if I have.
No, I don't.
I've never seen a patient with it. I don't know how does it happen.
I don't know. I've just seen some of these like real sex episodes, you know, where
oh, serious?
Yeah. Where like some dude married his car, some people love balloons. They're called lunars. You know,
I didn't know that.
Oh
okay.
yeah, there's a whole different, you know. So but either way, maybe it's the difficulty in connecting with other human beings, but still the desire to connect with love for love's sake.
Well, I think like, you know, the idea that you connect with love, and then when you connect with love, you connect with the beloved, but not just that person. You connect with the divine. Right. Because we did those episodes back in the day, and like, you know, you were making the point, you know, that it's not just a connection with another person; it's the connection to the divine. Right.
Yeah, the
unified connection with the other person. Yeah.
The unified experience brings you to another.
Yeah, like it opens up some other part of your experience. Like it opens you up to the supreme source.
There you go. Everything is supreme source.
It's a tool to open you up to the supreme source.
Yes.
And you have those. I mean, I know we're talking about love we weren't expecting to, but like you can have that experience when you're really in love with somebody. You see the world and everything looks like super beautiful. You know, all the trees are just a little bit more green, and if it's changing colors like in Chicago, then you know they're getting more red, or even if they're falling from the trees and drying up, you're like, that still looks so beautiful.
Yeah.
Look at that dried leaf sitting on the ground in that puddle in the Chicago drizzle. It's so beautiful.
The way you're making it sound right now, Eric, it sounds great, you know?
But I mean, I think that's the whole point, right? When you're in that zone, it has that effect. It triggers something in the Shen. Right? It triggers something in the Shen. And then the idea is that like when that thing is, whether it's sexuality or we went to the love part, I think part of the underlying message is supposed to be what? It triggers something in the Shen, and then you experience your own Shen's experience of the world, and it looks pretty cheery. Right? I mean, it's not like we do like traditional Chinese medicine. It's not an accident that they say joy is the emotion of the heart. Right. And the positive emotion of the heart when the heart opens. So I guess what you were talking about with the sex thing, sexuality aspect of it, it's kind of like if you can emotionally open up, then the heart's opening a little bit. If you physically let things go, the heart is opening more, and then that can open more and more, and then the experience becomes more profound. And whether it's love or sexuality or whatever, it rattles things inside free. Yeah. Okay. So, well, I mean, that's episodes to do in the future for sure. Just about that. Right. Yeah. Okay. So,
Eric, given our time and where we are, I think maybe we just do our little final wrap ups now.
Let me just say one last thing. It just comes up that you can meditate,
okay.
that you can also meditate yourself to this experience. That's probably the closer on this.
Okay. Okay.
So as an example, you can have it like in the Tibetan book of the Bardo, you can get there like in a kind of a thing that everyone's going to go through the dying process, right? As other things fall away. But you can also have this falling away experience during things like sexuality, or you can, like what we'll talk about next time, is you can try to meditate this thing.
Yeah.
Right. And have these kinds of blissful experiences, clear light experiences during the meditative process. Yeah. Okay. So cliffhanger for next time.
Cliffhanger for next time. But I think to the point, Eric, that you brought up, kind of how we got down this subject of this like sudden experience versus a gradual state.
Yeah.
That sex would be a sudden experience.
Well, but see, this is from the Dalai Lama school. So it's like they're saying that this gives you flashes of this.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think with their, I don't know, long subject, maybe we'll do it more next week. But like the idea is that like in that experience, you have this flash of something that's probably there the whole time. But it's still part of it in the Dalai Lama's thing. It's still part of a gradual path because you're going to lose that.
Right. But in the but then
you'll lay there in the afterglow and then it'll go away and you'll have to do some more stuff to kind of realize it or something.
Yeah. More dinners and like, emojis. No, but that is part of the gradual path. It's like, then the gradual path is the practice of continual opening. So that when those experiences come, you're more vulnerable. You feel safe being more vulnerable such that you can have less obstacles to experience that flow, to experience.
And in the context of experiences coming. Yeah. The idea, like, if you just do, I think if you don't know that this is a thing, we can all enjoy an orgasmic experience.
Sure.
But they're trying to say, like, listen, look more closely at that. And what you'll recognize within that is like you, deepest parts of who you are. Mm-hmm. And that's, I mean, I don't know, like no one pointed that out to me in sex ed class when I was in high school.
No. No. And I will, some of my tantric teachers will say, the experience of enlightenment, it's like an orgasm for your brain, for your mind. It's transcends the limitations of your body. And I know a couple of different, yoginis, some, female tantric practitioners, and they're still married and they have children, but a couple of them are like, they're like, I have sex because my husband wants to, but I get my release, my connection through my practice. So
there is something about that, like the meditative experience ends up being, and this is not to like, it's going to trash anybody's sex life, but the meditative experience ends up being just as good or better than the sex experience. That's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's real. Yeah.
Orgasms for the brain.
Yeah.
Braingasm.
Yeah. Orgasms for the Shen, right?
Right. Yeah.
SHENGASM.
That's even better.
SHENGASM. That's like some obscure reference because no one knows what the fuck that means.
Yeah, right. So you take the Chinese medicine, the Chinese word for spirit, and you put orgasm on it. That's an entirely American euphemism, SHENGASM.
No, but that's okay. Now we have like a whole book. We got a title and they'll just sit there. But what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jin Tantra, SHENGASM.
Yeah, exactly.
Collecting dust. Yeah, crates. Yeah, because it's an obscure title, but yeah, that's kind of what it is. It's a spirit thing.
Yeah,
and that might be, I guess, what you're saying in the suddenism. That's because you're having a sudden realization, like, holy shit, this is me. That's the suddenism of it that you're talking about. Oh, I get it. Yeah, I get what you're saying. All right, cool. So more to talk about. I guess this is went to lively places.
Yes, it did.
As it tends to go. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Always, Eric. Thank you so much for doing this with me, and thank you to our audience. All the millions of people all across the world, all across time, and all across the galaxy, if you will. We do appreciate everybody listening, sharing, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're catching this with your, whatever podcast app you're listening to us on. If you're on the YouTube, as they say, smash that like button. Share it with people. If you want to leave a comment in the YouTube, I definitely check. If you want to hit us up, email ginandtantra@gmail.com. If you would do us a solid and leave us a review on the Apple Podcast, it definitely helps out. I think we get probably about half our listeners through the audio version actually on Apple Podcast. So it's a popular platform for people. So that's a good way to be of benefit to the show. And, do your thing. Find yourself. Experience the SHENGASM this week.
Yeah, immediately.
Yeah. I post haste even while we're talking.
Yeah, why not? all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks, Daniel.
for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.
Hey, fellow GNTers. This week on Gin and Tantra, we discussed the Dalai Lama enlightenment, but most importantly, we talked about the SHENGASM, the role of sexuality and orgasm in allowing people to experience their own Shen in spirit.
But Eric, people are asking, but what's a SHENGASM? A SHENGASM? Well, fortunately, we're here to break that down. SHENGASM is so Shen is a Chinese word for spirit, and orgasm is an American word or English word for orgasming. And when you put those two together, you get a SHENGASM, an explosion of experience and sensation for your spirit, generally through your sexual orifices. What do you want? How do you want to call that? Is that how it works normally? Is there other ways that you can SHENGASM?
Well, I mean, like, I think ultimately you're trying to get the whole every chakra to experience the SHENGASM.
Explosions from the entire body. This and more on Gin and Tantra.
Yeah.
Peace.